Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Just a couple for the projects. That in mind. On 8. On the 3rd, we will be having a guest speaker. I confirmed, or I almost specified we didn't have our guest speaker this week. Sick family. Leap is going to be bringing Liana, the gal that we saw in some of the videos. They're also going to be bringing her teaching assistant with them. So they're going to be able to cover some of the stuff that I was hoping our other guest speakers would cover. And if they need it, because she's going to expand her presentation, which will carry over to the 8th. Because she can cover the educational aspects. And that was I'm going to touch on that today, talk about it, so we'll get more from people who are living and breathing. So on Tuesday, it's your menu projects, and then the following 2 sessions are guest speakers, and then we have the midterm. Can you believe it's our April midterm? So we've got an action-packed next few sessions.
For our menu project, do we have to use Boardmaker, or can we just do it on?
For your menu project?
Yeah.
No, you can.
Yeah.
A clipboard works just fine. If you want to use Boardmaker, I will be here tomorrow. I'm okay if someone wants to borrow it tonight. You can take it with you. You just have to sign in blood that you will not use it or leave it somewhere. And then I will be here tomorrow, even at noon. I'm going to be all day, so if people want to take it and use it down in the lab or whatever, that's fine. But I'm perfectly okay with the art or whatever you want. I have some people that actually collected items from their favorite places, so they should actually use the object. So feel free to get creative. But remember that part of it is that you have to not only make it, but actually use it and report back on how it went, because that's where the real learning takes place. When you forget, oh, I didn't have a way to tell them this, or oh, I didn't have a way to tell them that. And that's okay. I'm not going to penalize you for that. You learned from it, so that's great. You don't have to. Don't feel compelled. You have to use Boardmaker. If that were the case, I would have been saying, "Oh, hey, no one's coming to my office and borrow Boardmaker." I do get scattered. Yes, ma'am.
So you're making the menu and using it after
That shouldn't be a shock. That's in syllabus all semester. Anyway, also, a gazillion minus 2 or 3 of you have been making appointments because you went to talk about grad school and wanting letters of recommendation. And I'm happy to do that, but I'm getting very close to my saturation point. So if you have this overwhelming burning desire that you're going to want a letter from me, you need to contact me ASAP. Yesterday, last week, basically, to make it to anymore and do a nice job. So anyway, just throwing that out there. Time is drawing near. Okay, so we're going to talk about today assistive technology in the classroom. And there are really 3 ways that assistive technology is used in the classroom, but the goal for all of them is inclusion. Today's classroom is all about inclusion. What does that mean? When we talk about classroom inclusion,
Even if the child has needs extra attention, don't take them out of classroom lunch. You absolutely have to. You want to include them with everybody.
exactly. Back in the day, when I was in school, we didn't have some of the laws in place that are in place now, protecting the rights of students and families. We didn't even have the Americans with Disabilities Act until 1990. The public law 94-142 that originally guaranteed students with disabilities access to a free, appropriate education in the least restrictive environment, blah, 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 didn't even include regulation that required that people providing those services were actually licensed, certified, and adequately trained to perform it. And so, believe it or not, until the revision of that law took place, it was not at all unusual to see parent volunteers and other folks that maybe had a vested interest but weren't necessarily adequately trained performing some of those special services. Kind of scary. There were states that, even though the requirement to be a speech pathologist was a master's degree, they were still allowing people to work as speech therapists with a bachelor's degree because they got around it by declaring an educational emergency and that there weren't enough masters of people. Because when ASHA changed their standards, a lot of people requested to be grandfathered in. And so, anyway. So long story short, up until fairly recently, we didn't even have guarantees that the people providing services to our kids, particularly our kids with special needs, were even adequately trained. Scary. Back when I was in school, you knew who all the kids were who had an IEP, who had any kind of special services, because what happened? They were constantly being pulled out. Or, more likely, they were just very infrequently brought in to your regular classroom. So they were often put in what were called self-contained classrooms. You could probably tell us all about that. But so basically what would happen is, rather than having the child in the regular classroom with support and maybe collaborative service or consultative service from the specialist, the kid was segregated into a room, a classroom with other children who had special needs, particularly the ones that were maybe significantly physically or motorically impaired, like your kids with cerebral palsy. They were rarely included in the regular classroom. Now, it's just the opposite. There are guarantees, there are assurances, and there's certainly the attitude in most schools has changed, where the idea is to keep those kids in the classroom, the regular classroom with their peers, include them as much as possible, support is the goal, as opposed to pulling them out. So, assistive technology can play a tremendous role in promoting their ability to communicate, it can go a long way towards supplementing instruction. And we kind of saw that when we saw the video of the teachers that were involved in that research project in Toronto, where they were using the iPad with children in the classroom. And we saw them interacting with peers, and we saw, oh, there's actually some socialization going on. So assistive technology can be a great way not only to facilitate communication, but also to supplement and help with instruction. We saw them doing math lessons. It can really, really be helpful. And then finally, it can be useful in classroom management. What do I mean by classroom management? Kids just sit in one place and not move around and do different things throughout the day? Good. Especially younger kids, they might have circle time, and then they might have technology time, and then they might work on math. And so throughout the day, there are transitions. And so one of the uses of assistive technology could be like a visual calendar, a visual schedule, so that the kids can anticipate what's coming. They can be used as a way of behavior modification. We saw I think her name was Rosie, the little girl in the UK who was prone to outbursts and very destructive behavior. And through the introduction of assistive technology, she learned to start sharing and getting along, and actually to the point where her behavior improved so much that she was actually initiating appropriate interactions with other kids. So again, communication, instruction, and classroom management. Did someone have a hand up over here? I thought I saw a hand up. Just having a stroke. Okay. All right. So, classroom or educational inclusion is a buzzword. Have you not heard that multiple times in your classwork?
All the time.
No, really?
No, all the time.
All the time, because that's the key. The days when you had your own little special self-contained classroom are pretty much a thing of the past. You are very likely going to be working with a team, and you're going to be probably in and out of several classrooms providing supplemental support. Is that kind of?
Yeah,
Yeah. And so the whole concept of co-teaching, it's usually going to have the intervention specialist, you. It's going to have the regular classroom teacher, and very likely we'll have a speech pathologist as well. So it's not even just two people, it's often an entire team. So you and the SLP and the classroom teacher are going to collaborate on who's doing the language lesson, who's doing, and how we do that. And what's really cool, I think, is a lot of the things that someone who's an intervention specialist like yourself, it's the same way with SLPs. Guess what happens? Every stinking kid in the classroom benefits. They found that time and again, when you do that co-teaching, that collaborative model, where you have different professionals involved in the curriculum and in the instruction, every kid benefits. When we do pull-out interventions, obviously, we're not going to see the entire classroom, doesn't even have a chance to benefit. Because only kids that have a special need are going to get any kind of intervention. But even when we do consultative, where the person may come into the classroom and provide some support and maybe do a little bit, even the typical kids in that classroom, they see an uptick in some benefit to them, but the most ideal is when there's that collaboration, that co-teaching. And it kind of, why didn't we think of this before? because it really does work and every kid benefits. It's like when they introduced Soundfield FM systems into schools, every kid benefited. Ohio's test scores went up dramatically. Ohio was the first state to require Soundfield FM system in every classroom if there was renovation or new construction. They weren't going to require it to be retrofitted to existing buildings, but if any renovation took place or if any new construction took place, well, I live in Cincinnati. Guess what's been going on for the last 10 years in Cincinnati? They have either replaced or renovated every stinking school in the district. So guess what? Every school in Cincinnati Public Schools is wired for FM. Guess what has happened? During that time, Cincinnati Public Schools has become the highest ranked urban school district in the state and one of the highest ranked urban school districts in the country. People are coming from all over the country to look at some of the things that are happening. Now, it's just not introducing FM to the classroom, but it does have a dramatic impact. They also have a lot of magnet schools so that kids can actually be directed towards programs that are of interest and maybe more appropriate for them. But that is one factor, that introduction. It's a different type of technology, but the introduction of that technology to the classroom has had dramatic impact on the overall performance of every kid in the school. So it really helps when we try and include everyone. So that's the big buzzword. So there are differing degrees of integration that we talk about. Full integration is when, and that's the goal, is that children with special needs are in the regular classroom with their peers 100% of the time. If they have specials like phys ed or music or whatever, they're there with their peers, as well as just the regular classroom. My son's school is a 100% inclusion school. Only thing that's not 100% inclusive is their gifted and talented program, and the kids are actually pulled out 3 times a week for some period of time to do advanced work. Most parents, myself included, don't have a real problem with that. So 100% of the time, then they have full integration. Then you can have selective integration, and that's where you're going to have varying parts of the day are spent in the regular classroom, and varying parts of the day may be spent in some sort of a pull-out type of resource room or specialty program. And then you have non-integration or no integration, and that is when the child or the children with special needs spend all of their time in a segregated, and I use that word because segregation has really negative connotations, and I really feel like my bias, being very upfront and forward, this is how I feel. I do feel that non-integration is a bad thing for everybody. Legally, it's not an option, but I can tell you that realistically, it's still happening in a lot more places than we care to think about.
My brother's good, so I went to St. William, it's on the west side of Crystal.
Yeah,
And-
that was my school through the 8th grade.
Yeah. Well, we have the awesome autism program.
Oh yeah,
And
it's terrific.
So with the autism program including a lot of their classes, I just don't think that they're included in enough classes to be actually working with the students that they do, but they do kind of seclude them, like they're called the autism program. Autism has a certain
Right,
time in
and
the
it's
library.
actually technically, I think, considered a separate school, and
Yeah.
that's how they get around it.
Yeah.
So there are opportunities for them to interact with and with the regular students, but that's how they get around it.
Yeah.
Because if it were just a program within that school, because it's a private school, they also have some leeway because they can accept or reject federal funding, which which exempts them from, because remember, the law says public education, not private. But I've heard wonderful, wonderful things about that, and I've heard that the way that they classify it, it's technically a separate school, but it's sort of like, because if you're West Side, you understand, there's West High. But in West High, they have the college prep school, they have the science and technology school, and they also have Gator High School, all on the same campus. And so they're technically 3 different schools, but for all intents and purposes. I did not know you were a West Side girl.
Yeah.
Is that where you went to school?
Yes, it is. Sorry,
What
my mom
street
went
did
to
you grow
school.
up
Yeah.
What street did you grow up on?
Carnation, still live
Oh
it.
my gosh.
My mom,
I go past there to visit, because my parents actually live in Delhi, but they're
Right.
part of Delhi that is surrounded by Price Hill on all sides. If you go down Trenton,
Right, yeah.
okay, where the woods are, on the other side of the woods, that's still Delhi. That's my parents.
Yeah, and my mom grew up on Sunset, so.
Oh. Wow, that's cool. It's like old home. SPA 427. But anyway, so even though it's technically not an option any longer, there are enough loopholes that folks do get around it, often to the detriment. And if you guys are interested in autism in particular, do contact the folks at St. William's School, because I know that they allow observers, and it's like a national blue ribbon excellence program for autism. And it's great that they put that there because when I went there, we had over 1,000 students. It was a huge school. And over the years, the population of the school has gotten smaller and smaller. And it was, I think it almost probably saved keeping that school open rather than consolidating it with another school. So, but it's a very cool program. So it's worth checking out. Okay, so do you get that there's varying levels? Legally, we should only be having full and selective, but a lot of times there's not. I have very close friends of ours, their daughter has Down syndrome. She's one of those kids that has that shady 80 IQ range, or she's like around 83, 84, right on the cusp of the normal range of 85 to 115. And she was at, I won't say the name of the school, but it's one of the other, it's not Gamble Montessori High School, it's the other one. So if you're familiar with CPS, you'll know which one it is. But in any case, she has had, obviously, an IEP since she was in school. And they were not following it. And they basically put her in a classroom with primarily kids that had severe or multiple physical handicaps and gave her busy work. And her parents found out. And guess what? At the time, her dad was on the school board. And no, not a good idea to do that. And it has gone through mediation and now to the point of litigation. And she's in a different school and she's actually doing great. And the issues that she was having, that the school was using as excuses for pulling her out and segregating her, have never been observed in her school. And she is fully included. She's even in the choir. Got to see her, and she got a solo in their vocal performance. So yeah, very, very cool. So even though legally they're not supposed to, schools are finding ways to do it.
Is there a percentage of the time that says like what's selective? Like full is 100 and no is 100 in either direction, but is there a percentage of the time that like clarifies selective?
Yep,
Is that
part,
right?
and that's part of the reasoning, because what they were saying was that she was being included in regular classroom for phys ed and for recess.
That my mom is a special ed teacher, and she just got out of like an actual like legal battle with two different students because she like took over for a grade, and they were going to like gym class and then music class, and they called it integration.
Yeah.
And it made my mom so mad, and so
Right,
when
because-
she got into them
Because
last year,
technically specials, like phys ed,
Yeah,
art,
should
music, don't count.
yeah. And my mom said now that they're in, like this August was when they first started being completely in, and she goes into the classroom with them.
Right.
Like certain days or whatever, she said they're doing so much better than they did last year. Like
And that's the
miles
thing.
better.
That's the thing. And think about the benefit to the other students having peers who are different in their classroom.
That's so funny you say it, because my mom literally was just talking to me about it.
Yeah.
She said it brings everyone, and like, especially like having her in the classroom with someone else, it keeps the other students just as focused and like interested in like this new
Exactly.
kid. And
Exactly. And
Teaches
a lot
them
of
how to
times
deal
the
with them.
strategies that she's going to use are going to help your kids that have ADD or who are just struggling in general. Because, I mean, even as adolescents, older elementary kids still learn by what they observe. And if they see, and like you said, they're going to get interested. Ooh, what are they doing? That's really cool. I mean, so yeah, thankfully, attitudes are changing, and people are recognizing that just because someone has some sort of a handicap or disability, we shouldn't shun and hide them away. Which is what, I mean, oftentimes, the families, it was recommended that they institutionalize kids with special needs. So, times are a-changing, sometimes for the better. So, to segue into Anna's comment, the degree to which they are actually integrated is going to vary. And it can be varied by subject. So, if they are in an integrated classroom and they are considered competitive, that means that they pretty much have the same curriculum and the same standards as the other kids. Okay? They're active if they fully participate, but maybe their learning outcomes or their progress measures are modified. This is what our friend's daughter has in math, but not in language. Language, she's in a competitive program. She has to write, she has to put together, term papers, the same things. The only difference is that she is allowed to keyboard because she has low muscle tone and she has fine motor issues, and so rather than writing on paper, in a notebook, things like that, she does have my old iPad. I gave it to her for Christmas. And so she actually uses the iPad for all of her note-taking, for all of her papers and everything. But like in language, because it's the same curriculum and the same expectations, even though she's keyboarding rather than writing, it's still considered competitive. She has some modified outcomes and measures for math, so she is considered active for that. She isn't considered involved in any of them because she's at a higher level. But involved means that the expectation is not academic. They don't have the same expectation of outcomes for children, but they want them to be included and integrated for communication, social, and or motor goals. And then there's non-participatory, and that's when they're present, but they're passively involved. They're just kind of there and being observed. These are your kids that are severely physically and cognitively impaired. I had a family that I was working with that their daughter at the age of 18 months suffered an anoxic brain injury. She had a ruptured and she got peritonitis and became unconscious, and they basically were doing CPR and everything they could to bring her back, and she was locked in. She had very limited capabilities. She was cortically blind. She had very poor head control, trunk control, and yet, if you told a joke, she laughed appropriately. If she heard a story that was sad, she cried. If you asked her a yes/no question, she could indicate yes and no very consistently. I mean, we felt very convinced this was a kid who cognitively was still completely intact, but her brainstem was really damaged during the anoxic event, and so she was basically locked in. And unfortunately, she was in an inclusive classroom, so I mean, she was integrated, but she was basically treated as a non-participatory student because they just did, I think it was sheer laziness on the part of the school, because she did have a consistent yes/no response. I felt like they could have used some sort of an auditory scanning access device for her because it did appear that her auditory comprehension was fine, and she could have used a switch activated by a head turn, I think, or even a sip and puff if they tried. So it was very, she actually passed away. She just did, like a couple months ago, she got an upper respiratory infection. They sent her to the hospital, and we got, oh, she's doing much better. She's really, her temperature's down. She really rallied, and the next day we got a message, she passed away overnight. Totally unexpected, but it was frustrating because her mom called me, because I had worked with her for a long time. I'd worked with her in First Steps, the early intervention program, and then I worked with her beyond that. And her mom called me one day. She goes, "You're never gonna believe it." I was like, "What?" She goes, "It's Natalie. I got a note from the teacher. They sent a note home from the teacher on Natalie." And I was like, "What happened?" And she said, "One of the other kids got in trouble, and as Natalie was sitting there and heard the other kid getting in trouble, she burst out laughing uncontrollably, and her teacher had to have a lecture with her about it's not nice to make fun of other people when they get in trouble." And she's like, I never would have dreamed after initially what had happened that my child was going to get a note sent home because she was bad. And she loved it because knowing and having seen video of her before this happened, that was her. She was Miss Instigator, and then she'd pull out so that the other person was left holding the bag. I mean, so it was neat to see that, at least to some degree, that personality was definitely still in there, because she got the biggest kick out of other people getting in trouble. So, anyway, so like I said, within that integrative model, there can be varying levels of expectation and participation, ranging from just basically being there parked in a chair or whatever, to truly being competitive with the other students, with maybe some sort of support, like keyboarding instead of writing, or braille rather than something, so it's a hierarchy. So let's talk about assistive technology in the context of communication. We can use it in several ways. Through conversation and social exchange. We saw that like with Rosie, how they used it to get her to actually start interacting and being social in an appropriate fashion with her classmates. Student responding. I think of like the math lesson that we saw, where the kid could use the touch screen in order to do the counting or the addition activity. Small group participation. How might that work? What might that look like? Maybe circle time. Maybe talking book. sort of an activity where assistive technology is being used in a small group lesson. My son's in a Montessori program, so all the classrooms have 3 grade levels represented. So like he's in what's called a 9 to 12 room, so it's 4th, 5th, and 6th grade. Well, the teacher may be over here with the 6th graders debriefing. They just got back from Camp Joy, and part of Camp Joy is they see a play, an outdoor play about the Underground Railroad, and they actually are involved in it. They are the slaves that are caught by the bounty hunters, and there's a slave auction, and all this stuff goes on. And so I know today is their first day back. The teachers are going to be taking the 6th graders in each classroom and kind of separating them out and doing kind of debriefing and a history lesson related to all things slavery and the Underground Railroad. Whereas the teaching assistant that's in the classroom, the instructional assistant, is going to be working with the 4th and 5th graders on whatever their regular lessons are. And maybe they are also going over this, but it's going to be in a different method. So there's a smaller group. So in those cases, it could be socialization, it could be conversational exchange, but it also could be adaptive, integrative activities like them being able to respond and answer questions related to a story that they've read. So it's not just individual one-on-one interaction, it's actually within a group. For projects and presentations, we saw the young lady that was the college student that always was flirting with the football players, but she talked about how she would use it to write all of her papers, and she would use it. She made a speech. So that's another way. What are some other ways that you can see assistive technology use where the primary focus or the primary activity is communication of some sort? Can you think of any others?
I'm just thinking, I know there's like a stigma with AAC devices and how other children see people with AAC devices and they're like, oh, they have like problems speaking, things like that. So maybe if you had like an iPad day or something where you taught all of the kids how to use like Boardmaker on the iPad or something, it would probably make them think like,
and
oh,
so
that's super cool.
there's communication and learning taking place. It's very focused. I'm really excited for Leanna's mom to come and talk because she's been a late adopter for tablets. She was very frustrated with the technology because her daughter can't really have the fine motor skills. Now develops eye gaze for tablets, and her mom is like on fire. So I'm probably going to have to rein her in to not spend the entire time focusing on that because, and she has, if you guys are interested, if any of you really have an interest in AAC, she actually has a Facebook group that she started called the AAC Club, and there's tons of interesting articles, there's lots of stories and anecdotes. If you are interested, friend me on Facebook and I can then I can give you approval for membership in the AAC Club. But she is always, she's a trip. You guys are gonna, you met her?
Yes, came to my
She, mom, should be a stand-up comedian. She really should. She's so funny. And she has such an awesome attitude. But yeah, I may have to give her a timeout on because she's suddenly now, because she's been waiting. She's really frustrated. She's like, I know this is technology that my daughter could really benefit from, and I know that she would love using it because it's cool, it's new, it's what everyone's doing. And now they've got eye gaze adaptations, and so she is just. But yes, doing things like that where you actually can take it and rather than making it a point of person standing out maybe in a stigmatized way, it actually makes them kind of cool kid in the class because, look what they get to do. So anyway, that would be another good example. Any others?
I think anytime that like we need to bring a clicker to class to do surveys through class,
Yeah.
like they could easily be included in that because it's just like how they talk every single day.
Absolutely, absolutely. There's no reason why they couldn't integrate that into like a clicker system. Good point. Okay. So then our next is instructional assistance, and like your example would also be maybe an example also of instructional assistance. Classroom discussions. While that's also a type of communication, if it's very specifically related to a lesson, for example, we might put that type of an activity in instructional assistance. Probably the biggest area is related to literacy. That is one of the hot topics continuing in education, and that is literacy because the child's level of literacy is an excellent predictor of overall and future academic success. If a child is behind in their reading, writing, and spelling skills at the 3rd grade, there is a dramatic increase in the likelihood that they will not complete high school, that they will not experience academic success. Very, very strong predictor. So ways that we can incorporate AAC into literacy, things like the talking books, use of the device for writing papers, spell check, things like that that can help. So very, very useful tool. You mentioned clickers. Well, it could also be used for test taking. If the child has an integrated device, especially like the touchscreen types of devices, and if it has internet access, they can set up tests, sort of like we, I don't know if you've ever taken any quizzes or tests online in Nika before, but that can be set up so that the child is able to take the test that way. Note-taking, homework, again, those projects and presentations. So anything, any method that AAC is used where it helps improve or incorporates the instructional experience, we're going to call those instructional assistants. Okay? And then we have classroom management. And we talked about using visual schedules and calendars, helping modify or shape behavior, and then the socialization. Those are pretty straightforward. If you had to, let's say, you were doing a lesson with a child or children, or you were having a therapy session with them, do you feel like you would be comfortable taking like either board maker pictures or clip art or whatever and making a visual schedule for the session? But I think that's a very practical thing that I think I might make that an alternate option to doing the talking book. Is coming up with a visual schedule for a child or a group of children throughout their day, and then specifically like one specific thing, like maybe language time or reading or whatever, and actually then do a specific one just for one of those, because you could have one for each thing. You could have, okay, this is our master schedule for But then within each of those things, you could also have a separate one. So I'll throw that out there if you would rather than doing some sort of a talking book. If you would like to do a daily, simulated daily schedule, visual planner schedule for a child, and then take one of those specific activities that they would do throughout the day and subdivide it. It's like maybe you're going to do speech therapy lesson and whatever, you're going to have to get creative on what are your goals going to be, and then what would your activities be to address those. I want at least 3 items with emphasis on the at least part. And I'll put out a reminder about that with supplemental instructions so that if you want to substitute, because I had massive revolts from people not wanting to do the talking book, and I understand that, but it's really kind of cool, and once you learn how to do it, you save your template, it's really not too hard. Okay, so what happens is that children who are receiving special services go through a process of being profiled, and they are supposed to be looking at their strengths. So they're looking at how is this child different, but what are their strengths that will help decide, are they in a fully inclusive, are they in a partially inclusive classroom? If they're in a fully inclusive, are they going to be at the competitive level? Are they going to be at the active level? Where are we going to put them? And so they will go through a profile process that includes all of these categories that you see up here. So demographics, what are their preferences, their strengths and talents? What are their dislikes and their needs? Okay. What are their literacy and their mathematical or calculation skills like? What are their social and emotional skills like? What's their language and communication? What are their hygiene and self-help skills like? Do they have learning preferences? You know, is this a kid who really likes interactive learning experiences? Is this a kid who really prefers auditory? Is this a kid who really prefers visual? We have to figure those things out. And then what are their specific challenges to learning? So all of the kids are going to go through this type of a process. How does AAC play a role in all of that? If they're a nonverbal child, how do you see that playing out? What did we just talk about? Test taking. Are they able? How are they going to communicate their wants and needs, their preferences? It's their primary mode of communication, and so they're going to have to use their assistive technology to demonstrate or perform so that their profile can be completed. Okay, so it's integral. How is it involved? How is it a factor? It's of utmost importance because it may be the way that all of these profiles are completed so that we get a clear picture. So let's talk about a kid. Let's profile a kid named Sean. Sean is 10 and he has autism spectrum disorder. He lives at home with his mom. His parents are divorced. He attends a neighborhood preschool. It's Montessori. Gee, I wonder where this case came from. Classes are age-based. 3 to 6 is pre-K through K. 6 to 9 is 1 to 3. And 9 to 12 is 4 to 6. He's selectively integrated and involved in a 9 to 12 classroom. And he typically participates in lessons and work of the younger age cohort. So even though he's not a 4th grader, that's basically the stuff that he's doing. Okay? He loves numbers, sorting, manipulables, gee, what a surprise, books, and anything to do with wild animals. He likes being around other kids, but he doesn't necessarily like engaging with them. He does like being there with them. He loves his table mates. And boy, was it hard when the sixth graders graduated and were no longer there. And now he was a sixth grader. The little kids were now fifth graders, and there was a whole new crop of fourth graders. How you were talking about transitions, that was a nightmare for him. But anyway, so he really was sociable, not necessarily social. Likes patterns, order, and predictability. Say classic autism. He was very neat, almost not really to the point of OCD, but he was pretty daggone close. Everything had a place and everything was in its place. Never saw, when I first met him, he was in fourth grade, never saw a kid's backpack. So neat and organized. I mean, with Will's, I want to use a stick. And I'm like afraid when I open it to put his lunch cooler thing in it that I might encounter some critter on the way out. But that was not the case with Sean. He had dislikes, he had tactile defensiveness to clothing tags, and he hates to wear shoes and socks. So typically, as soon as he gets inside, the shoes and socks come on. Doesn't like loud sounds. They basically have to take him out of the building if they're going to do a fire drill. They have to let his instructional assistant know that fire drill's coming, and she actually takes him outside, and they go on the far side of the football field because if he hears that sound full force, he's done for the day. He will just have a total meltdown. He doesn't like changing routines. So, again, nothing real surprising. Literacy and number skills. He reads at a first grade level, and he has very good sight reading skills. He can count to 100 and beyond, and he can add and subtract up to 3-digit numbers. Actually, he's beyond that now, but it's time. He has good basic concept, understanding color, shape, size, order, first, last, next, those types of things. And he's very good at matching. He loves any kind of matching game. Loves. Social and emotional. He's very eager to please. He loves verbal praise. If you tell him he's done a good job, he's going to be proud and pleasant to be around for the next half hour at least. He likes stickers, and he loves high fives. And he'll even say that to me if he does it. If you say, "Oh, wow, Sean, that was really good. High five." And so, which is really kind of cool because he never used to initiate. He would wait for you. Well, now he realizes, hey, it's okay if I'm doing a good job. I can say, hey, give me a high five. So it's been kind of cool to see him because he's been in my son's class from day one. I mean, they were pre-K together, and now they're graduating from 6th grade this year. So, anyways, so he has pretty good behavioral control. When he's upset, other than like the fire alarm, he tends to withdraw and pull back. And there have even been times where like he'll go behind one of the bookcases and just kind of lay there in the fetal position. Thank goodness it's Montessori, so there's carpets and pillows. So he gets comfortable, but he'll often rock. So you know something's up. And what's really interesting, it was really hard for him when he moved into the 9 to 12 program. He had what they call a Velcro aid up until that point, meaning that in addition to the teacher and the instructional assistant for the whole classroom, he had an individual person that was with him all day long. They did away with his Velcro aid when he moved into the upper grades, and that was really, 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 really hard for him. And now he's great, and they were afraid because the IA for his classroom resigned, and his former Velcro aide is now his structural assistant in the classroom. And they were really worried about how that was going to pan out, but it actually did really, it's worked out well. He does need encouragement at times to interact with his peers, and he does often prefer to kind of sit on the edge and observe than to actively engage. But his test scores and show that he really is getting it because he's actually performing pretty well. So this is Sean. More about him in terms of his language and communication. He can write his name and the numbers 0 through 9, but he does have some fine motor issues, so his handwriting is not very good. He says a few words. Some are very, very consistent, but others are more sporadic. He has good basic comprehension for short stories, things like that, so not bad. He follows 1- and 2-step directions without any problem. He's very good at yes/no. That's actually his preferred method, is to ask him a yes/no question. He will point or use gestures to indicate his wants and needs. They're beginning to use, or at that time they were beginning to use pets with him. He has an iPad, but he will only do games on it. He will not do anything instructional. Not going to happen. So they don't take him to school because he's not using it appropriately. Hygiene and self-help. He's ambulatory. He eats independently. He's toilet trained. Although he wasn't toilet trained until he was in the 3rd grade. It was cool to see. He does need assistance with buttons and snaps at times because of his fine motor issues. Meticulous hand washer. Never have to worry about him being a mess because he doesn't like anything sticky, particularly. And if anything's dirty, he will go and get a wipe and clean it. Like if they did an activity and someone got like crayon or marker on the table, I'm like, gosh, stay out of his way. He's making a beeline to the wet wipes. But that's actually something that he enjoys doing, and so if he's having kind of that they will often give him something to do like that. Hey, can you come help me? And if they get involved, like wiping the outside of the fish tank or the terrarium, he goes from 100 down to 0 and almost nothing flat. It's very common for him. So, my wife's kind of the same. She's pretty clean. So anyway, learning preferences. He's very much a visual and tactile learner. Very hands-on. Loves hands-on stuff. Loves to manipulate and take things apart. I think he could probably be a very good mechanic or some sort of a technician because he is good. He has good visual spatial skills. He's good at matching. So I think there's a potential that he could do some sort of a job like that. He likes to have choices. But I mean, he really does like to have choices that are clearly defined. He does really, really well with the picture schedule. That really helps keep him focused and on task. And of course, the verbal praise that I mentioned. He does need frequent breaks. His attention span is not the greatest, but it's not, squirrel. He's not like that. But he does need frequent breaks and interruption. If it's a complex task, he needs it broken broken down into more manageable steps. Tends to perseverate on favorite activities, that's why he's no longer allowed to bring an iPad to school with him. Or one of the reasons why. And he does need extra time and encouragement for transitions. Okay? So, we're getting a picture of what Sean's like. So with that in mind, can you think of a communication need and a goal that AAC might solve, an instructional need and a goal, and a behavioral need and a goal for him, based on this profile? Discuss some extra slides. Take a couple minutes to decide. So, anybody know about our buddy Sean? And realize that you might want to use text for one thing, you might want to try a gestural system or something that's not tied to anyone. Although that's nice word across the context. So communication, instructional, and behavioral.
But really, just kids with autism are really intelligent. Less visual technology things, right? But obviously, they're everything. This is from games. It's gonna be like some, like some, we can make it into. Like, just. Yeah. This part of the film is gonna be different, but look at how it's gonna be, look at how it's. You can tell.
Okay, it's gotten quiet, so. Who has a good goal and use of AAC for communication?
We said, his goal would be just like increasing the lexicon.
Okay,
And we said potentially we can use text because, with paper, because he's super organized, so he'll be able to find everything right away.
okay,
And the pictures might really just help him because he's a visual learner.
okay. Excellent. So vocabulary might be, you could do categorization. That would be cool, let him do his own pages, categorize the stuff. Oh, wow, very good, excellent. Any another potential communication goal? How about he will learn basic subject, verb, object, grammatical form using PECs. I want blank. I need blank. Not rocket science, that one. But it says that he's trying to use 2 and 3 word combinations. So let's get him the most basic grammatical form, the first grammatical form that kids learn. Yes.
Well, you mentioned that he likes to use it for games. So maybe even turning it into a game, like whether it be what you just said, like, if you do this a certain amount of times, you get the same points, or if you go out on the playground and use your device with somebody else, like
Okay.
turn
So a
it
pragmatic, yeah, some sort of a pragmatic goal, a social interaction goal, social communication, and then you said make it a game for every kid that you interact with appropriately on the playground, you get a point, and if you get so many points, then you can cash it in for a prize. Excellent, great idea. That also could go into the behavior management. See, you're killing two birds with one stone. I like the way you think. How about an instructional assistance goal? That he has problems with handwriting and fine motor. Yes.
We were just thinking, since he's decent with numbers, I mean, he can count and he can do some subtraction, so math-wise, since he can't write very well, help him with math problems on a pencil or something.
You know, help him use it as, as a method of taking notes, performing calculations. You might be able to wean him off of games only. Switch from an iPad to like an Android, like a Samsung. It's different enough. He may not associate that because now, we say, okay, here's an iPad, here's a tablet. Well, look at the commercial that they're doing right now, like for the Windows one, and doing the comparisons. On first glance, they look very much alike, but in reality, they're very different. But he may not make because some of them are different. It's got a color difference. He may not immediately make the leap that, oh, this is just like my iPad. And especially if they don't immediately load it with a bunch of games. It's like, okay, he didn't just figure out how to go to the App Store, put in the password, download these games. Someone had to do it for him. Be the adult. Don't put it on there. So then he'll learn, or buy one that's a new freaking color so that he can differentiate. And this one, you don't put any of that stuff on it. So he knows. Because again, he's visual. That might be a great way. One's white for academics, and the black one is for all of the fun stuff. Could be. But yes, so I was thinking the same thing going through my mind. Okay, he can write the numbers 1 through 9, and he can do addition and subtraction of up to 3 digits. But what if we got him using that to work on math lessons or to take notes?
He knows the numbers 1 through 100 or whatever. So he knows more numbers than he can write or work with.
Exactly. Yeah, because even though he only writes 0 through 9, if he can do 3 digits, he knows up to the hundreds. Could we bump that up to, because you never know. Yes.
I know there's an app called Letterscore too. I don't know if you've heard of it before, but it works on like handwriting and writing numbers, and it gives touch points and stuff. So you can improve your handwriting that way. So even if you use it as a game for him, he doesn't even know that it's actually
Exactly.
working on
No, so great. So you guys, I think you guys get it. That as we integrate and include children with special needs into the regular classroom, if they are users of AAC, that's going to come right along with them, and we have to find ways to make it work. But then again, there are some children that maybe they don't have to use assistive technology as their primary mode of communication, but can you see ways that it could be adapted to use for certain activities, for certain educational goals? And things like the visual schedule, every kid in the classroom is going to benefit from that. That's what I think really good intervention specialists do, is they take the things that they're doing for the kids with special needs and try and make it something that all of the kids in the classroom can benefit from, so that it helps reduce that stigma and that sense of segregation. Because kids are savvy, and it doesn't take a whole lot for them to figure out that, ooh, this is different, this, so if we can minimize the stigma, the negative aspects of that. Questions about classroom integration?
maybe a silly question, but if it, like if a kid won't be able to be an active participant in, let's say, a metal, like a metal shop, that's not what I'm trying to think of,
Like a shop class.
like a shop class.
Mhm.
Would that be an area to say that, like, to not take them in, or would it still be, if it's gonna be difficult
Well,
for them to
because it-
passively be there because
right.
of safety reasons?
Right, so you would probably, shop is usually an elective, you would probably choose it.
But what if they're like interested in that? Does that make sense? Is there ways to create something else?
I'm sure that there are. I just, right off the top of my head on the spot, I can't think how we would necessarily do it. I guess your outcome, you would have to adjust your educational outcomes, and so it would probably be a non-participatory.
Right.
Because obviously if they don't have the fine motor skills to break, to safely run the equipment. Yeah, let's have Johnny who has aphetoid spastic quadriplegia use the bandsaw, yeah!
But I mean, they're really interested in that. I know it's.
Sure, no, well then, but then, if he is or she is, then it becomes not their problem. The school's gotta figure out a way to get them in there. So I guess that's the easy answer. They gotta make it happen somehow. I'm just glad it's not my
Yeah.
responsibility. I have probably in the top 5 professions that I have the most respect for, this includes like police officers, first responders, the behavior and intervention specialists in schools. The stuff they do. We have my son's school that intervention specialists are amazing. Well, actually, one of the intervention specialists is the gifted and talented person that Will works with, because I think we get so focused on intervention specialists, special ed teachers, work with kids that have problems. They can also work with kids that have gifts and talents. So, but I'm blown away. I just have the most respect for you because you're going to be having as much of an impact as we like to pat ourselves in the back for having spent a day. Absolutely amazing. So kudos, and we need it. I mean, there's a critical shortage. There are school districts that are declaring educational crisis, and they're getting temporary licenses for people to be intervention specialists who have absolutely no training whatsoever. That's scary.